Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, June 6th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer at Slate, on a couple of the Supreme Court rulings to review and a couple to look out for. Also on the program today, Ukrainian dam blown up in an act of sabotage. Who did it? Still unclear. We can take a guess. Texas sheriff files a criminal case over DeSantis' migrant kidnapping. And meanwhile, apparently DeSantis has done it again, sending kidnapped migrants to California. The Atlanta City Council approves funding for Cop City despite widespread opposition and a new report that the cost is actually double. Oklahoma State School Board appears to be the first ever, or I should say, attempting to the first ever funding of a religious school with tax dollars in this country. SAG-AFTRA membership authorizes strike of actors with 90% approval. Negotiations start soon. And the PGA merges the Saudi Live Golf Association or League.
Yeah, it's like one of the most cynical things I've seen in a while.
Twitter's filing in a recent court case completely destroys the so-called Twitter files narrative. Merck sues the Biden administration over Medicare drug price negotiations. Massive wildfire in Quebec is destroying the air quality, not only in Quebec and in Canada, but now in the northeast of the United States. Republican-led committee to subpoena FBI head in an attempt to find evidence of the Biden crime family. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday.
Tuesday.
As
Hi.
Emma Vigeland says. Hello, Emma.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Matt is back from his rave that he had the other night. So
yeah, I was raving.
Release the public records security footage. We got to find Matt.
We got a lot to go over today. A lot of news, and we're going to cover a couple of these cases with Mark Joseph Stern. Let's just start in Atlanta. The Atlanta City Council okayed funding for Cop City. As you know, Cop City is a massive
Training center,
training facility,
obstacle course.
Yes, I mean it really is. I mean they it's basically like they're going to create, the idea is to create a small urban environment so they can practice
putting down protests.
Disneyland for cops. How fun.
And the council members voted 11-4 to approve a $31 million in public funds for the construction of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center. However, they also, when we have talked about this in the past, we said it's going to cost them $31 million and then they're going to get the rest from federal funds or grants or private entities. Well, it turns out that the city also will be paying $1.2 million a year over 30 years for using the facility. But there's also, according to the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, is that what it is? Yep. There'll be $1.2 million in annual payments to the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is raising money now to pay for the construction. So the Atlanta Police Foundation's raising money, and they'll get it from who knows what entities. And then the city will pay back the Atlanta Police Foundation ostensibly for raising the money, I guess. And it dedicates at least $67 million in tax dollars. $67 million to the construction and operation of this facility. And I would be willing to bet you everything I know, or I own rather, that it's going to end up being more.
Yeah, there are a lot of really big financiers behind the private donor part, including Arthur Blank, who owns the Atlanta Falcons. He's the Home Depot guy. James M. Cox, the James M. Cox Foundation, Coca-Cola as well. So, the city council caved to that.
Here is a clip of Clifton Kelly, an Atlanta area first responder, testifying to the Atlanta City Council in opposition. This was before the vote. This is from Monday, or yesterday, I should say.
My name is Clifton Kelly. I work as an advanced EMT for the DeKalb County Fire Rescue Department, although I'm here just as an individual, not representing my employer. I live in Decatur, just a few minutes down the road from the proposed Cop City site, and I was born here in Atlanta. I'm here today in protest against a gross misuse of public funds. I want to make it very clear to every single one of you on City Council that those of us first responders who are not police stand to gain absolutely nothing from the proposed Cop City site. A giant simulated city in the woods where police will train in riot techniques because they're scared of what will happen the next time they kill someone like George Floyd or Rayshard Brooks does nothing for us. And they should be scared because there should be consequences for immoral, inhumane behavior. This should be a time to rein in rogue law enforcement, not reward them with millions of dollars. We've all read the autopsy results from the DeKalb County Medical Examiner. We know that the activist who died in the forest toward Taguito was murdered by Georgia State Patrol, and we know that the police here will kill again if they're given the opportunity. If I killed one of my patients, I would rightfully be put in prison. But if a police officer kills one of my patients, there would be calls from a lot of you for more training and $1 million budget increase. That's an ass-backwards approach to public safety. As for fire and EMS,
that's basically it. I mean, we have, let's play that other clip too. This is number 6. This is another comment from an Atlanta resident. I don't think we have his name there with his daughter. Here is a again, a minimum of $67 million, at least 36 of it dedicated over the next 30 years, 30 million right up front. That's a minimum.
I live in Southwest Atlanta in District 10 with my wife and daughter. Both my wife and I grew up here. Our families call Atlanta home, and we are deeply rooted and invested in this city and its future. I've never spoken at council before, but I've been so disturbed by how the city has ignored the voices of its constituents, lied about how much money is going to this facility, violently suppressed its own residents for protesting and organizing to stop the destruction of Woolani Forest, just so that the police can build a new training center that we don't need, that we don't want. I knew I had to be here today. I have a little girl. She's about to turn 2. She's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I never knew I could love someone so much. On our way to daycare in the morning, we sing songs as I try to avoid the potholes that have been there for years. I drive by neighbors waiting at bus stops with no benches, no shelters from the rain. We see unhoused neighbors and community members sleeping under makeshift shelters. And we see cop cars cruising our neighborhood all day, every day. I've been harassed on more than one occasion by the cops in my neighborhood. They make me feel the opposite of safe. Spending $60 million, 60 million taxpayer dollars on a new police training facility is the most heartbreaking, reckless, and quite frankly, anti-black thing this city has ever proposed in my lifetime. I cannot believe I'm standing here pleading for you to not spend the tax dollars of a black city to tear down a forest in a black neighborhood, to increase the policing and caging of more and more black people, all this in a city with black leadership. I'm tired of it. Just think of what $60 million can do to care, educate, house, and nurture the people of the city, the children of the city. Say no to Cop City. Thank you.
I mean, that's there are really multiple arguments against against something like this.
Invoking kids like that, though, and like 2-year-old, like what investments do we get to point to our young children?
But that's ultimately that. I mean, that is, I think, like the strongest.
Yep.
There may be people who could make some type of argument as to why there should be that type of investment in policing. I don't. I think it's garbage, but the idea that, you have limited resources and you're going to dedicate that much money to basically, I mean, it really lays out the dynamic, right?
An obstacle course.
We're going to invest $60 million over the next 30 years to take care of the problems we're creating by not using that money to invest in actually the people who live here.
Yeah. In human suppression.
Exactly. I mean, it is like, we know that there's going to be a problem. And so we're just going to pay to sort of like corral that problem that we're creating by refusing to invest in people in the first place.
And the first responder who spoke exactly to that attention. Someone who's actually on the front lines of this. This does nothing to benefit him or like the actual response to issues in the city.
The Twitter users at Snacklesby and final tally for the 9 hours of public comment against Cop City 234 and for Cop City 4.
Wow.
And the hundreds of people they didn't let in, I'm quite sure would continue that thing. But I mean, I think folks in Atlanta, fought this. I don't know what the next step is, but we'll see. Meantime, a couple of words from our sponsors before we bring on Mark Joseph Stern. One of our sponsors today is Henson Shaving. As you know, I grew a beard 1.5 years ago.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. We stopped promoting the razor there in part because, I didn't need a subscription. I didn't need so much disposable stuff. I'm only shaving this part of my face. And Henson Shaving came along. These are manufactured by the same folks who manufactured parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover. They're Canadian. And it turns out that discomfort that people have with disposable razors is not a function of the blade being subpar. It is a function of the distance of the blade from the shaver. Apparently, like razor blades are like diving boards. You can sort of see that when you get a full razor blade. The longer the board, the more the wobble, the more nicks, cuts, scrapes, etc. And they use aerospace grade computerized, machines. I don't know what those CNC machines. I can't remember what they're called, but Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, less than the thickness of a human hair, and it means a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. And you can see here, like they have these channels here, so you can evacuate the hair and the shaving cream. No more banging on the sink anymore. No more scraping hair out with your thumb. And the beauty about Henson Shave, really, honestly, is that they want to be the best razor, not the best razor business. That means that you buy it once and you are done. There's no plastic. There's no subscriptions. There's no proprietary blades. There's no planned obsolescence. This I will have until I die. And the razors themselves cost about, I don't know, $3 to $5 a year. Because it uses standard, those standard old school blades. And now they're giving you folks a 2-year supply of blades for free. All you got to do is go to hensonshaving.com/majority. That's HENSON shaving.com/majority. Add a razor and a 100 pack of blades to your cart. Then enter code majority to get the blades for free. The link is in the description. I'm telling you, and you should check it out because they have a couple of different colors, some really cool ones. This is a great Father's Day gift because your dad will, or you, frankly, will have this for years and years to come. Also, our sponsor today, Rhone, my new favorite clothing that I own. I didn't mean that to rhyme. They have what they call the Rhone Commuter Collection. It is honestly the most comfortable and breathable and flexible set of clothing that is known to man, and here's why. The Commuter Collection, it has what they call 4-way stretch. It's stretchy. I don't know what a 2-way stretch is, but it's a 4-way. And the material is breathable. It is flexible. It fits incredibly well. And it looks like, the commuter shirts, the button-down ones I have, they look like dress shirts.
You should say, you wore it to a funeral. I saw you in your outfit. And I said, is that the Rhone shirt? Because it looks like a dress shirt. And you said yes.
I wasn't going to bring up the funeral because I wasn't sure that, but I did.
Oh,
this
sorry.
is the amazing thing about that.
You went to a party.
I did. I went from the funeral and I got invited to a movie after, like a movie opening party. And I was able to go to both in the same shirt. It looked great. And it is wrinkle-free, comes out of the washing machine, wrinkle-free. It also doesn't smell after a long day. It has this thing they call Gold Fusion. It is an anti-odor technology. It is also 100% machine washable, so you have no dry cleaning. The shirts are great, and I just picked up a pair of shorts. I also have the Commuter Collection pants, also great. It's like slowly replacing my whole wardrobe. I got a blue one like this, not sort of like this color.
Nice.
But, it's a nicer shirt. It's not going to be wrinkled. The Commuter Collection get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to Rhone.com/majority report. Use the promo code majority report. Save 20% off your entire order. That's Rhone, RHONE.com/majority report. Links will be in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Mark Joseph Stern. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Pleasure to welcome back Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer at Slate, during his really what should be in other times, maybe in like a hypothetical times, a happy time for you. But this is June now is rather imposing, foreboding. It is the time where we start to get all of these Supreme Court decisions. Welcome to the program, Mark.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here in June, a waking nightmare of a month for me, but never a paucity of topics to discuss.
Let's talk about the last two big rulings by the Supreme Court, and then maybe we can just at least mention like what you're looking for coming down the pike. It was now, I guess, it seems like a year ago, but it was about 2 weeks ago when the Supreme Court looked at Sackett v. EPA. And I will say, like, we're going to talk about two cases where the worst possible case scenario wasn't quite achieved, but it feels like it's building towards that. But let's talk about this. What was the Sackett v. EPA about?
Yeah, so this was the culmination of a decades-long fight by industry to gut a really important provision of the Clean Water Act that protects wetlands. So the Clean Water Act has a provision that specifically says it doesn't just protect large bodies of water like lakes and rivers and streams. It also protects wetlands that are adjacent to those larger bodies of water. Important word there, adjacent. And so the fight for many years has been developers trying to fill in, destroy, build on wetlands that are near a larger body of water, but not directly touching it. They are neighboring, say, a lake or a river or a stream. The EPA has generally tried to protect those wetlands because, not only does adjacent mean next to, not connecting, but they serve a really important purpose, which was the whole reason Congress added this provision. They serve a purpose of flood control. They help to purify water as it's coming into those larger rivers and streams. They help reduce sediment damage, especially as climate change increases. There are all kinds of benefits to us as people who drink and swim in water by preserving wetlands that are near the lakes and rivers that we are used to, you might say. And
they do. I mean, the point of it being adjacent is because it's for protection of those major bodies of water. I mean, in the final analysis, like they're not. I don't know that any part of the planet is disconnected from another in most respects, but they are so not disconnected as to implicate each other.
Yeah, they're intimately connected. I mean, the point of protecting wetlands in this law is not actually just to protect the ecosystem of a wetland. It is to protect the rivers and streams and lakes that are important for us as humans to be able to drink from and swim in. I could spend hours now quoting you all of these scientific studies about how when there's wetlands near a larger body of water, the water that is ultimately ends up in our systems and cities is purified. It's much higher quality. There's more protection, because nature has actually figured out how to do this and how to filter water before it gets to the urban settings and pipes that bring the water directly to our homes. And so what this case asked was basically, if a wetland is next to a large body of water, but it's not directly touching it on the surface. So there might be an underground connection and there might be a part-time seasonal connection, but if it's not constantly directly flowing into that larger body of water, so much so that it's indistinguishable, is it still protected? And by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court said no. And it basically said no by rewriting the law and saying, look, we understand that adjacent to does not mean connecting. Two houses in a suburb may be adjacent to each other because they are next door. They are not connected to one another. There is space between them. But the court basically said, well, if we choose that reading, we will hurt a lot of property owners' feelings. We will prevent a lot of development on wetlands that industry wants to develop. And so we are going to choose not to honor Congress's words and instead replace the word adjacent with something like continuously touching and connected to. And in doing so, probably took more than 50% of wetlands in this country outside of the scope of EPA protection in one fell swoop. And that is going to have really bad spillover effects for us, for people who need to drink water, which is every human being on the planet.
I just want to linger on that point for a second. The fact that this was codified into legislation by Congress in 1977 to make the EPA's rule on this stronger. This is exactly what the Supreme Court says they don't want to be engaged in, and yet they are undercutting it. Like the way that the right wing kind of positions itself in attacking the administrative state is like, well, then let's just put it through the legislature, right? But it did go through the legislature, and they're still being judicially activist, which I think is really key to understanding this case.
Yeah, and of all people, Justice Brett Kavanaugh made that case really well. He did not agree with the 5 justices in the majority, and he went through this history. And basically what happened is Clean Water Act is passed in the early 70s. There's a huge debate about whether wetlands are protected if they are adjacent to a larger body of water or if only if they're directly touching a large body of water. Army Corps of Engineers drafts up a regulation that says it's fine as long as they're adjacent. Congress codifies that regulation into law, into the statute we're talking about now. And almost half a century later, the Supreme Court comes along and says, and I'm really not exaggerating here, the court says, we just don't think that that's a legitimate goal of Congress. If Congress wanted to do that, it would have had to be much, much clearer, even though it's, as clear as you could possibly get in the text. And even then, we think it might lead to some kind of unconstitutional intrusion on the rights of states and landowners. And that gets to your point, Sam, at the outset, that this was bad, but not as bad as it could be. Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch have this whole separate opinion where they say, well, we don't think the court goes far enough. We basically want to strike down the entire Clean Water Act because we don't think a body of water can be protected by the federal government unless it has not only a clear interstate connection, but it is used as a means of continuous transportation of goods between multiple states, and otherwise the federal government has no ability to protect it. That's what they said. The court didn't adopt that position, but maybe that's going to be the next case.
I mean, there's I want to circle back to that, but there seems to be, aside from where you have Gorsuch and Thomas basically saying they don't have the authority to do this, basically saying the federal government does not have the ability to protect these this range of water, essentially, of our environment. They just don't, under no circumstance do they have it. It also seems impossible to imagine how Congress could have written a law that would have covered these things. If we accept that the federal government does have the ability to protect our water, and our air is probably next on the docket. But if we accept that fact, if they so choose to, it's impossible to imagine how Congress could have written this to cover what they wanted to cover, because adjacent means adjacent. There's no other magic formula that you could say. I suppose you could say 20 miles or within 5 miles of any body of water that is has a certain amount of cubic water in it or something like that. But it would be impossible for them to get at what they wanted to do, which is to protect these major waterways. Because if it's uphill as opposed to downhill, there's too many factors associated with it. You have to leave it to the experts. And like you say, Alito said, we need to see it. Essentially, you need to be able to ride a canoe between these two bodies of water. And if you can't do it, then it doesn't count.
Yeah, and in case the text weren't enough, you have this whole legislative history and all these findings by Congress where there were sand dunes, there were berms, there were man-made dikes separating a wetland from a waterway, and Congress looked at that and said, yes, we want to protect those wetlands. And now, 50 years later, the Supreme Court just says, no, you can't.
Okay, so the other thing, I mean, aside from like the idea that Thomas feels that the federal government shouldn't have the ability to do any of this, was this a case where you could have possibly seen either like sort of an attack on the Chevron doctrine or on the notion of deference? Because it feels like there was no explicit attack on those doctrines, but in actuality, it was an attack on that doctrine.
So I totally agree that it was, because one of the things the court said in this decision was we're overriding everything the EPA has ever said about this under Republican and Democratic presidents. We're just stepping in and imposing our own definition and saying, EPA, you don't get to do this. But I think that the reason the court sidestepped a direct attack on something like Chevron deference is that the Clean Water Act rules are very much in flux. And this is like my favorite sort of sordid underbelly of this case. The Supreme Court stepped in toward the beginning of Joe Biden's presidency when Biden's EPA tried to repeal the Trump regulations, because of course Trump's EPA had come in and said, we don't care about water, we don't care about wetlands. The whole mission under Trump was to allow as much pollution and destruction as possible. So Biden comes in, his EPA tries to change the rules and actually implement the Clean Water Act as written. The Supreme Court steps in and reimposes Trump's rule on the Biden administration and on the EPA. So the Supreme Court issues in April of 2022 a shadow docket order with no explanation by a 5-4 vote that simply says we are reimposing Trump's Clean Water Act rule on the federal government until further notice. And so the court already had the EPA operating under the previous president's ridiculous regulations. The rule is so in flux and has been so kind of captured by the courts already. I don't think they needed to take that step of talking about deference because they just did whatever the hell they wanted.
I mean, why are they waiting for another case? I mean, because they've been sort of teeing up this attack on deference. And just to be clear, so that people know, deference is just sort of this principle that when courts are faced with an agency's making a determination as to how best to fulfill their mission as sort of required by or mandated by Congress, we defer to the agency because that's where all the scientists are. That's where the experts are. And we're just not as expert at this. They've been sort of swimming around like sharks around that doctrine. And in this instance, it seemed like an opportunity for them to deal with the doctrine, but they didn't mention it, but they were like almost just putting it in practice.
Yeah, well, and they've been doing that for a long time. The Supreme Court has not invoked deference to agencies in years. It is not using Chevron deference. It's just pretending like it's already been overruled. I think the court wanted to do something different in this case. I think the court's goal with this case was to basically tell federal agencies, even if your mandate is clear, even if Congress has given you a very explicit goal, we're not going to let you do it if we don't like it. If we think that it's too harmful to property owners or to developers or to states, we're not going to let you implement this rule. And that's a kind of different goal from overturning Chevron deference, which is another way. I mean, it's very similar, but it's another way for the court to overrule agencies by overruling their scientific expertise and saying, yeah, you think that wetlands protect water, as they might have said in this case, but we disagree and we know science better than you do. The court has teed up a decision to overrule Chevron deference next term. I think it just had a slightly different aim with this case.
Okay. All right, let's move to another case. I mean, I think we're gonna be feeling the implications of this case for decades now. 50% of the wetlands gone will be opened up essentially to development without regard as to the damage it's going to do to our water supply, to the ecosystems of other large bodies of water, et cetera, et cetera. But let's move on to Glacier Northwest versus Teamsters. This is another one that could have been
worse,
much worse.
Yeah.
Well, could have been. I don't know. You characterize it, because I feel it's bad, but and I think it is a sign of things to come. But it's not as bad as it could have been.
Yeah, it could have been catastrophic, and instead it was just awful. That's how I would put it. This is a case that was teed up as a direct challenge to the federal right to strike, which is something that the New Deal protected very vigorously. We passed the National Labor Relations Act, which guarantees employees the right to organize collectively and go on strike when they see fit. And one of the key safeguards here is that the federal law that protects the right to strike generally supersedes any state level efforts to punish a union for organizing a strike. So that sounds very abstract, but think about it this way. If states could allow their laws to be used against unions every time there's a strike, then the employer would simply walk into a state court at the beginning of a strike and slap the union with a million different lawsuits: negligence, recklessness, conspiracy, fraud, trespassing, destruction of property, whatever. And they would just drown the union in lawsuits that would prevent the union from ever striking in the future and from organizing an effective strike. That is how unions basically worked before this law, and it was a nightmare. So the federal law says not only do unions have this right to strike, but the federal government generally supersedes state authority to attack unions as long as that strike is arguably protected by federal law. So as long as the workers are engaging in a kind of conduct that is arguably legal and arguably protected, they cannot be slapped with civil suits. Their unions cannot be slapped with civil suits. It is the National Labor Relations Board of the federal government that has jurisdiction. They step in when there are complaints. They resolve unfair labor charges. They are the ones who deal with this, because again, otherwise unions couldn't function. They would just drown in lawsuits all the time. So this is a case about truckers. They drive the cement trucks that you see on the streets. They decided to go on strike. Their employer would not come to an agreement at the bargaining table. They went on strike after their trucks had been filled with cement, and they brought the trucks back. They did not try to destroy the trucks. They didn't try to destroy the cement, but the cement was ultimately ruined because the strike had sort of lengthened the timeline, and by that point, the cement was too hard to be of use. So
and
the
to be
employer,
clear, they left the truck spinning. I mean,
they left the truck spinning. The drums were running. The employees did everything that they could to protect this cement, right? They took the trucks back. They left them running. They just couldn't protect the cement because it's a very, very tricky business and it hardens very fast. So the employer steps in and sues the union and says, you organized this strike, and this strike destroyed my property. And the Washington courts say, well, this is not a case for us. This is a question for the National Labor Relations Board, because clearly this conduct was at least arguably protected by federal law. And the Supreme Court reverses by an 8-1 vote. And the Supreme Court says that what the truckers did in this case, their strike, was clearly illegal and not even arguably protected, because they failed to take reasonable precautions to protect their employer's property. And because of the lack of those precautions, they opened themselves and their union up to state level lawsuits, and they get no protection from federal labor law. And only Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented from that decision, which I thought was a pretty big shock.
Okay. All right. So I want to go through the sort of like the two different, the Coney Barrett authored decision and the sort of like adjoining decision in favor of the same outcome. I want to get to that in a minute, but it seems like there's no way to get around. Like, it seems like in every instance, because of this, you'll be able to sue a union in state court, because if you're ignoring the arguability that this was not a problem, like, right? I mean, the way that this should have gone is the state court goes, we don't have jurisdiction here because it's not obvious what they did. It's a question of, is leaving a cement in a cement truck spinning around like this, like completely reckless. And, as opposed to, we took the trucks and we hid them and we didn't tell you where we left them. Like we went on strike en route to the job, and where the truck is, you're going to have to find out. That to me seems like, okay, you're really being reckless with this. But this is arguable, right? I mean, like, it's written into the law. Like, what is arguable? Well, whether it's, not a slam dunk. And in this instance, it wasn't a slam dunk. The National Labor Relations Board could have found, like, yeah, we don't like this or whatnot. But we talk about the other cases like milk and cheese and stuff like this that have set the precedent that this is judged against. And had they found that it was arguable, they would have inhibited the state court case going forward, and the National Labor Relations Board would have made a determination.
Yeah, and to be clear, the National Labor Relations Board has already stepped in here and accepted the charge of an unfair labor practice. And something that Justice Jackson says that I think is clearly right is, if the NLRB thinks that there is something here, that there's smoke here, that should be enough to say that this is arguably protected, because they're the experts and the ones tasked with doing this under the federal law, not us. But to your broader point, there are all of these cases involving perishable goods like milk and cheese and yogurt and fruits and whatever that are in the hands of someone who is shipping them to their final destination. The shippers go on strike, and ultimately the cheese or milk or whatever spoils and is useless. And in all of those cases, both the NLRB and the courts have found that those strikes were protected. And they found that because the whole point of a strike is to hurt your employer's bottom line, to show them how valuable you are as a worker and to force them to come to the table and negotiate. Like, the purpose of a strike is to make your employer feel the pain and the burn of you walking off the job and really using the leverage that you have as a cog in their machine to force them back to the table. And Justice Jackson has this great section where she says, employees are not indentured servants. Employers are not their masters. Like, they do not owe free labor to their companies. Like, they get to strike under federal law. And if that leads to the destruction of some products, whether it's milk or cheese or cement, that's how it works. That is the choice that Congress made when it passed the National Labor Relations Act. And the court just totally chucks that principle. This is the majority opinion. There's a 5-justice majority opinion by Amy Coney Barrett. She just chucks that principle. And she says, well, we're not going to credit the truckers for refusing to steal their employer's property. Yeah, they could have driven the trucks away. They could have hidden the trucks. They could have destroyed the trucks. But, we're not going to credit them for not doing that. They also should have refused to load the cement into their trucks, knowing there was a chance that they would go on strike and this event would be ruined. And that just has it backward from all of the case law, from the actual statute. That is not how strikes work. That is not how the right to strike works. And so this is a real blow to workers' ability to actually collectively strike when state courts are going to open themselves up to endless lawsuits filed against unions saying, well, you didn't take the right precautions, so now we're going to bankrupt you.
And it's going to expand what taking the right precautions means, right? Yeah. I mean, it could be like you decided to strike in late November. Christmas is the season in which we make all our money, and you did not take the precautions. You should have striked in June, because Christmas is when we make our year, and that's not fair.
That was kind of the justification for, by the way, the rail, like breaking the rail strike a little bit, because it was just too crazy of a time. But I would imagine that they employ that kind of thought going forward legally, which is what's concerning.
Someone's gonna test it, right? I mean, that's what's gonna happen next. Is some employer is going to, or some, the American Enterprise Institute or the Heritage Foundation or whatever that legal entity is gonna find a plaintiff who's gonna try and make that argument, at one point or another.
Yeah, and this case comes out of Washington State, which has like the bluest courts in the country and very good labor laws. Imagine what happens when this fact pattern plays out in Texas or Florida or a state with terrible labor laws. Like, this is a real existential threat to unions in a way, because any grocery worker, rail worker, retail worker, whatever, we could go down the list. Like, there's always some reason why they shouldn't strike at this moment because it'll hurt their employer's bottom line. And what Justice Jackson says that the majority just rejects is that's the point of a strike. And if we take that away, then the right to strike no longer exists under federal law.
All right. I want to get into the aspect of Ketanji Brown was the lone dissenter, but there were sort of two camps in the decision, and Sotomayor and Kagan signed on to the Amy Coney Barrett decision. Will you just sort of like parse that out for us, like what those two camps who all signed on to the outcome of the case versus sort of like the reasoning behind the case and what the implications of that are?
Right. So the majority, Amy Coney Barrett, along with Sotomayor, Kagan, Roberts, and Kavanaugh, they take what the media called a middle ground or a compromise, where they zero in on reasonable precautions and say, this is just a case about how they didn't take reasonable precautions, so they weren't arguably protected. So let 1,000 lawsuits bloom. Gorsuch, Thomas, and Alito are off in a kind of separate world where they say, yeah, we definitely want to stick it to the union here, but we would also like to overturn all of the precedent that protects strikes as long as they are arguably protected, and dramatically cut back on the amount of federal safeguards that we have for striking workers and their unions, and really make it so that unless a union's conduct is 100% obviously protected from the start, that state courts can open their doors to lawsuits, which is not a way to actually implement the National Labor Relations Act. It goes against the text and like a century of precedent. And it means, if put into effect, that unions are going to get slapped with endless suits because, you can never prove that something is obviously clearly 100% protected. That is a fact-bound, nuanced issue that has to be resolved usually by the National Labor Relations Board. So they just want to remove all of these protections. The majority wants to remove like half of the protections. And I think that's why Kagan and Sotomayor joined the majority, because the alternative would have been much worse than this.
In practice, like, how is this going to work? In other words, like in the next case, and I own, I own a five and dime, and my workers strike. Like I say, it's before Christmas. This is when I make all my money for the year. The rest of the year is basically a wash, and then I make my profit, and which is the case in retail for a lot of outfits. And I say they did not use. I'm going to sue them, because they did not use enough caution in terms of like my business. Like, this is really costing me a lot. This is my one time of the year. I go to state court, and then like what does the case continue, or does the state court kick it up into the federal system, or does the National Labor Relations Board have a means in which to say no? This is argument. Like, what? This seems to like open up a Pandora's box.
Right. So, it used to be, and it should be, that if the National Labor Relations Board proceedings are suspended until the board can come to a conclusion and conduct an investigation.
And to be clear, in Northwest, the National Labor Relations Board did step in.
It is investigating, and has been investigating and doing something entirely separate from this litigation. And what this decision says is none of that matters. That if the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel steps in and says, we think this was arguably protected, we're embracing this unfair labor charge, we're launching an investigation, like, it's unclear if that should have any bearing at all on a state court's decision to allow or disallow a civil suit against a union. This is a very much an open question in the case. And how I personally think that this is going to cash out is that it's going to help Republican appointed general counsels to the board stick it to unions even more. Because I think what we're going to see is, the next Republican president will fire the general counsel on day one and put in some horrible anti-union, management side lawyer as the general counsel of the NLRB. He is going to start just handing out filings that say, I don't think this was arguably protected, go at it in the state courts. I don't think that this conduct was protected by federal law. Let 1,000 lawsuits bloom. I think what this does is empower the general counsel to make it easier for suits against unions to move forward in state courts, but doesn't really empower a liberal general counsel to stop those state lawsuits. It's kind of a one-way ratchet, if that makes sense.
Well, could you view this in the same vein as other efforts to undercut the administrative state? And I know it's different than the EPA. Like the EPA is essentially like issuing decrees on environmental protection, and this is more of like a separate body that adjudicates labor law. But in the same way, this is the Supreme Court overriding these agencies that have been around for decades at this point, tasked with these exact issues, and saying, no, we know best, and we're imposing this and weakening you in the process.
Yeah, I would say this is an attack on the National Labor Relations Board when it is in Democratic hands. When Democrats are running the board and the general counsel is a Democrat, this gives state courts pretty clear authority, although the bounds are kind of blurry. The court didn't fully resolve this issue, but some authority at least to ignore what the board is saying, to ignore the general counsel, and to open the doors to lawsuits. But then again, when the board flips into Republican hands, I think it's going to give the general counsel a tool to really lobby in these cases and say, we don't think this was even arguably protected, so the lawsuits can go forward. So yes, it's an attack on the administrative state. It's an attack on the board's authority and the general counsel. But as with so many of these attacks on the administrative state, it only really kicks in, I think, during a Democratic presidency. And as soon as you have Republicans running the show again, the court is probably going to step back and say, wield this power however you like.
Because there's no real like definitional or limiting principle on where the state court can't sort of like intervene. There's no, because I mean, how much more? If it's like, there's really no other answer, right? I mean, it's arguable or it's not arguable. I mean, even not arguable is sort of hard to sort of like establish. The idea was that Congress wanted to give the National Labor Relations Board wide authority under this to make this assessment, and not in any other place, because they wanted to have one clearinghouse. And so just about everything is arguable. But if you start saying this is not arguable, it's definitionally arguable because the National Labor Relations Board is arguing about it right now. I mean, it's like they have destroyed the capacity again, it seems to me, of Congress, even though we don't have a Congress that would do this at this point, but they have destroyed the capacity of Congress to sort of make decisions on this.
I completely agree. And the point you just made is exactly what Justice Jackson said, and said this should have been the beginning and the end. It's definitionally arguable if the clearinghouse for all labor disputes thinks that it is arguable. And so this is yet another case of courts filled with non-experts and partisans and ideologues stepping in and saying, we know better than these members of the administrative state, which is apparently so dangerous, even though the administrative state answers to the president, who we get to kick out of office. These justices are on the bench for life. We can't do anything about it. And yet they are claiming that the separation of powers and principles of democratic accountability requires them to be the final decision makers in all of these disputes.
All right. So we've had you've had a not catastrophic, but a really unpleasant so far June. What do you anticipate is going to make you feel worse in the coming weeks?
So the court will definitely overturn affirmative action. I think there's really no question there. I'll be looking for exactly how far it goes in the majority opinion, whether Clarence Thomas is writing it or whether Roberts is writing it, but they're going to overturn it in principle. The court's going to allow at least some measure of anti-gay discrimination among business owners in the 303 creative case, and say that business owners have a First Amendment right to ignore non-discrimination law and discriminate against gay customers when there's some kind of expressive conduct involved. I think the court is probably going to do another attack on the Voting Rights Act and eviscerate Section 2 even further and make it impossible for federal courts to protect Black communities in red states and stop red states from gerrymandering them into oblivion and diluting their votes. And I think maybe the only silver lining is that the big election case, the independent state legislature case out of North Carolina, will probably get tossed because the North Carolina Supreme Court flipped from Democrat to Republican and overruled its own decision. So we'll be spared that horrible decision for at least some period of time. But I think in the other big cases, we are in for an extremely rough June. I would say a bad June is rising.
And you didn't even mention the student debt case, which is also, I think, going to be,
not optimistic. And the standing analysis in that case is going to be absolutely atrocious and make us all want to light our hands on fire because clearly these plaintiffs don't have standing. But when the court wants to do something, it just does it.
And the standing being that there's to essentially come and sue for relief, you need to prove that you're being harmed. And the universality of understanding that these plaintiffs are not harmed is pretty stunning. I mean, we will end up talking about that when this comes down. But and so I have a feeling we'll be touching base with you again this June to have you, I guess, bathe more in your misery and really, but all of ours. I mean, this was predictable. And it is, it really is like watching a slow motion train wreck. And because the moment that Donald Trump won the election, there was a high, I don't know if a high probability, but certainly a probability that he would have the opportunity to, shift the court in this way. 6-3 is a big difference between 5-4. And once RBG died and they were able to slam in a new justice within 3 weeks from the election, it's just a matter of time. And we're going to just see more and more of the degradation of what we sort of all grew up understanding about the role of government was in our society, completely turned on its head.
Yeah, unless the court changes hands, it will only keep getting worse every single June, I'm sad to say.
And just to Sam's point really quickly, the fact that Coney Barrett is writing a lot of these majority opinions just puts into stark relief how the Democrats completely bungled this opportunity. And like she was the one, right, that replaced RBG. So thanks for being our pain sponge, Mark. Appreciate it.
Happy to soak it up.
Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer at Slate. Thanks again, buddy.
Thanks.
We're going to take a break and head into the fun half. How did the Democrats screw it up, though? I mean, the loss of the election.
Well,
get RBG out of the paint.
That too, and then RBG basically.
She wasn't going to go. She messed up.
Okay, well.
I mean, I think there were people who were like, don't force her to resign, but at the end of the day, like these people on the court, they have the responsibility of understanding like where they fit in the world.
Right.
And what she did was incredibly irresponsible.
Also a little bit more from Obama during the old...
and Obama in particular screwed up with the Merrick Garland thing. I mean, that was, I can't imagine everybody. Lawyer, I can't imagine everybody isn't sort of sick of hearing this. But even in that moment too, we were screaming about this.
What's the point of you being like a Harvard constitutional law guy if you can't step up here?
But the fundamental failure was a political one, because there really was no operative way for Obama to force McConnell to hold hearings. There was no way to do that. But what he could have done was not assume best practices by Republicans. We're going to appoint somebody that Orrin, what was his name? Orrin Hatch, liked. Orrin Hatch suggested Merrick Garland. Mm-hmm. And Obama nominated him for Supreme Court justice because he thought, this is going to appeal. And if we nominate an old white guy, then maybe we'll convince, the Republicans that we're not that crazy. And not only was that determination an abject failure, that abject failure was compounded because at one point it becomes clear that your dumbass strategy in the first place wasn't going to work. And so what you do, remember, this started in February of 2016, if I remember correctly. What you do at that point is you give it 30 days and then you nominate somebody else. And then you pull that nomination and you nominate somebody else. You make it a story every single week that the Republicans are denying the opportunity for an African-American woman to sit on the court. An opportunity for, you go through every member of your coalition as a Democratic majority, which you did the white guy, and then you go through women and ethnicities and races and criminal defense. Like you nominate 10 people and you make it stay in the news and you make it an issue. And instead what they did is just total surrender and just thought like we can bank on Clinton for winning. In fact, not only could they not bank on Clinton for winning, that open seat is I think the least accounted for reason why she lost.
Well, so yes, that's how they messed up, right?
That's how they messed up. It was specifically like the Obama administration.
But Obama, I think he doesn't want the story of his last year to be that there's massive malfunction in that he leaves. He wanted to act like everything was cool and maybe you can give me the TPP on my way out.
And lest we forget, when we began starting to discuss Dianne Feinstein's cognitive decline, it was made incredibly clear in the midst of these hasened Amy Coney Barrett hearings.
Best hearings I've ever been to.
I know. And then she kissed Lindsey Graham on the lips or whatever that was. But it was an embarrassing time for the party, which seems to be a daily occurrence, honestly.
Yeah, embarrassing and honestly tragic for the country.
Yeah.
Because all these hearings are just the beginning. We're going to have this for decades. There's not going to be a June when I'm alive doing this show where we're not going to hear the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's just going to get progressively worse and worse.
What happened last June? The fundamental right for 50% of this population stripped away. And let alone what we're seeing. And this stuff's quotidian. People don't even know these kinds of rollbacks. And then our drinking water is going to be polluted beyond repair in certain sections of the country in 10, 15 years, and we're going to ask why, and then we'll be able to trace it to this.
They're in Florida. They're using that semi-radioactive material now on the roads that the EPA has basically said you can't use for the past 30 years.
Yeah,
and
EPA.
That's that ball game over. That is going to be we're just going to increasingly see this, like
the cancer highway.
I don't know if we're 5 or 10 years out from reintroducing lead into the paint and the gasoline.
Well, property owners.
It's only June 6th.
Corners.
I don't think I'm going to make it through this freaking month.
Yeah.
I really don't. I'm going to have a freaking heart attack.
Yeah, the student debt one's going to be a doozy.
And
the thing about that last case too, when the union labor one, the fact that was just one dissenter and it was KBJ is also as depressing as anything. I heard Stern's reasoning.
I wanted to get more out of Stern about what his theory is as to why they're doing that, because I don't know if it's they're trying to set up it's so hard to see, and I certainly. If we had 4 or 5 KBJs on the court, it would be a different story. But you wonder if Kagan and Sotomayor are not sitting there going we are screwed, and the best that we can do is try and find 1 or 2 people on the court. Maybe it's Amy Coney Barrett she was vehemently anti-abortion, She signed a full page ad in the New York Times.
Yeah.
But they may be thinking there are other areas where we can have influence on her. And it's going to, it's full on political negotiations here on in, because the ship is going down, right? The ship is going down. And the question is can we, plug the hole enough so that we only lose the first 4 decks?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's my speculation, because it's hard to imagine that if there were 5 votes to go against this, that Kagan and Sotomayor wouldn't be on that 5.
It's hard to imagine complete ideologues and psychos like Clarence Thomas or Samuel Alito being now that they've been empowered, capitulating to politicking behind the scenes, because the problem with this body is that there's no ability of outside pressure except for the groups that got you in power in the first place, or the ones putting money in your pocket like Carlin Crow. What a coincidence. The big real estate developer, the big real estate developer that funds Clarence Thomas, he totally sided with property owners in that instance.
Well,
but there's no mechanism outside of that on the left or on the liberal side of things whatsoever. So we have to rely on internal politicking. I don't even have any faith in that.
No, I mean, I think you can have. I think you're right to be skeptical, but it's Hail Mary, desperation. The idea that and certainly this happens, right?
Office politics determining the future of our administrative state makes me want to jump out that window right now. Why do we have it open?
We should get like a.
Why am I in this business?
Carabiner and a rope, because that's basically where we're at.
God.
We're going to take a quick break, go into the fun half. Folks, it's your support that keeps this program alive. You can help this program survive and thrive by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. 98% of our membership revenue goes to building a huge net to catch ammo when she jumps out the window. Yeah, exactly. We're doing we need people manning it 24/7.
No, that kind of suicide or anything of that nature.
Of course,
yes.
But honestly, it's beyond depressing because it gets so little attention in other spaces. They will talk about it on legal podcasts, but outside of that, these cases get, a 15-minute, treatment, probably in total on cable news. The understanding that the general population has of these cases, I would put somewhere closer to nil. The understanding that even the activists have, unless they're directly impacted by the specific silo of these cases, is nil. The appreciation of the courts by the center to the left is, I think probably at an all-time high, specifically because of abortion, but it's still pretty low. And so that's where we're at. But
and it makes sense for it to be low. Sorry, just last thing on it, because there's no element of civic participation that connects to it. How can people feel empowered about these influencing these 9 unimpeachable priests of the United States? It is designed to be politically disempowering.
Yes, I agree. But I will tell you, I am convinced that is why Donald Trump won, is because that evangelical base came out hardcore because of that empty seat. And they knew the value of that empty seat.
The real problem here, though, is the Democrats don't see attention and enthusiasm for the courts the same way. I feel like this whole Roe thing is they're like, oh, we got enthusiasm now? We can do a lot less. Let's just trim our sails.
Totally. Also justforcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10%.
The chocolates will help, though.
Yeah.
Those aren't illegal yet.
No. Although
Co-ops on the chopping block.
Oh yeah. Oh man.
Emma.
Yes.
Yeah, you're gonna have to talk about.
I know we missed like 2 major news stories right at the end, including. I might do like a little extra thing, honestly.
You got to do something on that
Live
PGA,
golf.
of course.
Yeah. But yesterday we spoke about the Heat stealing one in Denver, making it an actual series. The Golden Knights taking Game 1. That's a little outdated now. Now they've taken Game 2. But we also gave an update on a major news story involving horse racing and Churchill Downs essentially shutting down because there have been 12 horses that have died in 5 weeks. Jeez. What is the ethics behind that sport? We spoke about it on ESPN.
That is 2.1 horses a week.
A week, yeah.
Tonight, Alex Hulkely will be talking about Lula, foreign policy, patreon.com/leftreckon. You can get access to that. That is at 7 o'clock Eastern time tonight on YouTube.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920 is the number. Golden Oyster Cult said, Sam almost said, folks, it's your support that keeps us alive.
Basically.
Yeah. Days like today. We'll see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.